Today, we're looking at a case that started in a dark alley in Washington, D.C., and somehow traveled all the way to the Supreme Court. It's a story that really makes you ask, what's the real price of a final verdict? And what happens when justice might have been tipped by secrets that were kept for decades? So, at the very heart of this are 8 young men who were convicted of a truly horrific murder. But here's the twist. For decades, there was evidence that could have completely rewritten the story of that crime, and it was just locked away in a prosecutor's file. And that brings up this huge, fundamental question. What does justice really mean when a final verdict is shadowed by such a profound, unsettling doubt? Okay, so to really get the weight of this case, we have to go back in time. We're going to a city that was right on the edge, to a crime that would echo for generations. Now, this wasn't just any year. 1984 was a real turning point for Washington, D.C. The city was absolutely gripped by a wave of violent crime. 182 homicides that year alone. And that number was about to explode, earning the city a really grim nickname. This is the world, the environment, where our story begins. It all happened on what should have been a totally ordinary day. 48-year-old Catherine Fuller, a mother just coming home with her shopping, was ambushed. She was dragged into this garage, robbed of just $40, and then subjected to this act of unimaginable brutality that ended her life. So, after this shocking crime, the police and the prosecutors, they started to piece together a narrative of what happened. A theory that would turn out to be powerful enough to send 8 men to prison for a very, very long time. The prosecution's whole case was built on this group attack theory, that this was an act of mob violence. But, years later, a completely different possibility would come to light, and it was one that questioned the entire foundation of the case. What if it wasn't a group at all? What if it was just 1 or maybe 2 people acting alone? Now, at the trial, the prosecution built what seemed like a really powerful case. They had 2 people who were actually participants and had confessed. They had witnesses who said they saw a group targeting Fuller, and maybe most damning of all, a videotaped confession from one of the defendants, Clifton Yarborough, who described the whole group attack in chilling detail. And, the jury bought it. 8 young men were convicted. They were sentenced combined 258 years behind bars. And it seemed like that was it. Case closed. But the story, well, it was far from over. Decades later, a whole lawyers for these men made a shocking discovery. In the original prosecutor's files, they found evidence that had been hidden from the defense the entire time. And this wasn't minor stuff. These hidden files had explosive information. There was an alternate suspect, a man named James McMillan, who was seen running from the scene and was later convicted of really similar attacks on women nearby. There was a witness who told police they heard groans coming from a closed garage, which totally contradicts the open group attack theory. And there was even evidence that a key witness for the prosecution might have just made up her story. So this discovery, as you can imagine, it ignited a brand new legal firestorm that would just rage for years. And the whole battle, it would end up hinging on the meaning of a single crucial legal word. This whole legal fight really centered on a landmark case called Brady v. Maryland. Now, the Brady rule is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly profound. Prosecutors have to hand over any evidence that could help the defense. If they hide that kind of evidence, it's considered a violation of a defendant's constitutional right to a fair trial. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. It's not enough for the hidden evidence to just be helpful. To win a new trial, the defense has to prove the evidence was material, and that is a really high legal bar to clear. It means the evidence had to be so powerful that there's a reasonable probability it's the jury's verdict. It's not about finding a little crack in the case. It's about showing that the crack is big enough to make the entire verdict crumble. So the ultimate question then isn't just would the jury have voted differently? It's something much deeper. It's about whether the verdict, now that we know about the hidden evidence, is still worthy of confidence. So after this long, exhausting journey through the lower courts, the fate of these men would be decided in the highest court in the land. The question before the Supreme Court was simple, but so important. Was the hidden evidence material? And right there in the Supreme Court, Justice Alina Kagan just cut to the absolute heart of it. She'd perfectly described the impossible position these guys were in at their original trial. With no other suspect to point to, their only defense was to blame each other, creating what she called a circular firing squad, a total legal nightmare. So the defense argued that this evidence about James McMillan, this was a bombshell. It would have totally changed their strategy and given them a real, credible alternative suspect. But the government just pushed back, calling the McMillan connection tenuous and basically saying the evidence of a group attack was just too overwhelming to be shaken. Then, in June of 2017, the Supreme Court handed down its verdict, and in a 6-2 decision, the court sided with the government. The hidden evidence, they ruled, was not material. The convictions would stand. The court's reasoning was just a crushing blow for the defendants. The justices basically said the prosecution's case was so strong, with all the confessions and eyewitnesses, that this new evidence was simply too little, too weak, or too distant to have made a real difference. In the end, the court just didn't believe it was enough to shake their confidence in that original verdict. For the men convicted of Catherine Fuller's murder, that Supreme Court decision was the end of their legal battle, a huge defeat. But it wasn't the end of their quest for justice. You have to remember, this decades-long legal fight took a heavy, heavy toll. 2 of the 8 men who were originally convicted would never see freedom again. They died in prison, their names never cleared. But the 6 surviving men, they've all been released on parole now, and what they've done with their lives is just remarkable. They've become these pillars in their communities, mentoring kids, working in schools, giving back in so many ways. But despite all of that resilience, the stain of a murder conviction is still on their records. So after decades in prison, finally getting paroled, and then that devastating loss at the Supreme Court, these men have only one path left if they want to clear their names. Their final hope doesn't lie in a courtroom anymore. It lies in the hands of the President of the United States through a presidential pardon. And so that leaves us with the same question that's really haunted this case from the very beginning. When a verdict is final, but the truth just feels uncertain, what does justice truly mean? This case is a powerful reminder that our legal system is made by humans, and it isn't perfect, and that the quest for justice can be a very long, very hard, and sometimes a heartbreaking journey.
Please be sure to share your valuable opinion in the comment section. And don't forget to visit our channel's community section as well. Thank you for your support.